You've been told that staying calm is a strength, that composure commands respect, that the person who never reacts is the one who holds the power. But here's what they didn't tell you. When you stay calm in every situation, people don't see strength. They see an absence. They see someone who won't push back. And in the silent calculus of social hierarchy, that absence gets filled with a single conclusion: you're safe to ignore. This isn't about losing your temper. It's about something far more subtle. It's about what happens when your calmness becomes so predictable that it stops signaling control and starts signaling compliance. Because in human interaction, respect isn't given to those who never react. It's given to those who choose when to react. And if you never do, people stop wondering what you're capable of. They stop measuring their behavior around you. They stop respecting the boundary because they've learned there isn't one. The psychology behind this is uncomfortable but clear. Humans are wired to read emotional signals as information. When someone raises their voice, tightens their tone, or shows visible irritation, it sends a message. It says, there's a limit. It says you've reached something that matters. But when you remain calm, no matter what happens, that signal never arrives. And without it, people begin to assume that nothing they do affects you. Not because you're unbothered, but because you've trained them to believe you won't respond. This is where the misunderstanding begins. You think you're demonstrating emotional control, and you are. But control without expression looks identical to indifference. And indifference, in social dynamics, ranks low. Because if you don't react when someone crosses a line, the line disappears. What you intended as maturity gets reinterpreted as passivity. What you thought was strength gets read as weakness. And the respect you expected never materializes because respect requires perception of consequence. If there's no visible response, there's no perceived consequence. Let's go deeper. Emotional signaling theory explains that humans use emotions to communicate value and boundaries. When you express frustration, even subtly, you're signaling that something matters enough to defend. When you stay silent, you signal the opposite. It's not that people consciously think you're weak. It's that their subconscious stops registering you as someone who enforces standards. And in the hierarchy of attention and respect, people naturally gravitate toward those who demonstrate that certain behaviors won't be tolerated. This is why the loudest person in the room often gets more respect than the calmest, even when the calm person is objectively more competent. It's not fair, it's not logical, but it's predictable. Because dominance cues, even mild ones, create a sense of boundary. They create friction, and friction makes people pay attention. When you're always calm, you remove that friction entirely. You become easy to deal with. And easy to deal with, in human psychology, translates to easy to overlook. Now, think about the interactions where this has happened to you. Someone interrupts you, and you let it go. Someone dismisses your input, and you stay composed. Someone takes credit for your work, and you don't escalate. In each moment, you believed you were taking the high road. But what the other person learned was something else entirely. They learned that you won't fight back, that your boundaries are optional, that they can push further next time. And they did. This is the hidden cost of constant calm. You think you're preserving your energy and maintaining control. And in isolation, you are. But socially, you're teaching people how to treat you. And when your teaching method is uninterrupted composure, the lesson they learn is that your limits don't exist. Not because you're truly limitless, but because you've never shown where the line is. And humans, by nature, will test until they find resistance. If they never find it with you, they stop looking. They stop respecting. The frustration you feel when this happens is real. You stayed calm. You were reasonable. You didn't create drama. And somehow, you ended up being the one who's ignored. The one whose opinions carry less weight. The one people talk over, interrupt, or simply don't consider. It doesn't make sense until you understand the mechanism. Respect in social systems isn't awarded for emotional suppression. It's awarded for emotional calibration, for knowing when to stay calm and when to let someone feel the edge of your boundary. Here's the shift. Calmness isn't the problem. The problem is calmness without variation. When you're calm in every context, you lose the contrast that makes calmness powerful. True composure is only respected when it's paired with the capacity for something else. When people know you can respond, and you choose not to, that's control. But when they suspect you won't respond no matter what, that's not control, that's disappearance. So what does calibrated emotional authority look like? It's not about becoming reactive. It's not about yelling or losing your temper. It's about introducing resistance at the right moments. When someone interrupts you, you stop speaking and let the silence sit until they notice. When someone dismisses your idea, you restate it with a firmer tone, not louder, just firmer. When someone oversteps, you name it, calmly but directly. These are not emotional outbursts, they're signals, and signals are what people need to understand where you stand. The key is tone, not volume. You don't need to raise your voice to show that something matters. You need to lower your tolerance for being overlooked. A slight shift in your delivery. A pause where you would normally continue. A sentence that starts with your boundary instead of their comfort. These micro-adjustments communicate more than anger ever could because they're controlled. They show that you're aware, that you're choosing your response, and that you're not someone who fades into the background. Another element is selective engagement. If you respond to everything with the same level of calm, nothing stands out. But if you stay composed most of the time and introduce a single moment of visible firmness, that moment registers. It breaks the pattern. It signals that this particular line is different. And people recalibrate. They start paying attention again. Not because you've become aggressive, but because you've reminded them that your calmness is a choice, not a default. This is also where emotional range becomes critical. Humans trust people who show appropriate emotion. If you're calm during a crisis, that's impressive. But if you're calm when someone disrespects you, that's confusing. It makes people question whether you even noticed, whether you care, whether you're present. By showing measured responses that match the situation, you signal awareness, you signal engagement, and you signal that your boundaries are active, not theoretical. The misconception is that any display of emotion is a loss of control, but psychologically, the opposite is true. Suppressing all emotion makes you unreadable, and unreadable people are either ignored or underestimated. What commands respect is not the absence of emotion, but the precision of it. Knowing exactly when to stay silent and when to speak up, when to let something go, and when to make it clear that it won't happen again. There's also the social perception of threat. This sounds harsh, but it's accurate. People respect those they perceive as capable of creating consequences. Not violence, not chaos, but consequences. If your constant calmness removes any sense that there could be a consequence for crossing you, you become socially inert. You're not a threat. You're not a factor. And while that might feel morally superior, it doesn't earn respect. Respect requires the belief that someone will defend their position when it matters. So how do you recalibrate without losing your composure? You start by identifying the moments where your silence has been mistaken for acceptance. The interactions where you stayed calm and later felt erased. Those are your recalibration points. Next time a similar moment occurs, you introduce a response. Not an explosion, just a clear, firm acknowledgement that what just happened isn't acceptable. It can be as simple as a sentence, as quiet as a shift in your posture, but it needs to be visible. You also stop rewarding poor behavior with continued ease. If someone interrupts you, don't just keep going as if it didn't happen. Stop. Let them finish. Then restart your point from the beginning without acknowledging their interruption as valid. If someone dismisses you, don't soften your idea to make it more palatable. Restate it exactly as it was, with the confidence that it didn't need their approval to be correct. These are not confrontations, they're clarifications, and clarifications preserve respect. Another technique is the controlled pause. When someone crosses a line, don't react immediately. Let the silence stretch just long enough for them to feel it. Then respond, calmly, directly. without hostility, but without warmth either. This pause does two things. It signals that you noticed, and it signals that you're deciding how to respond. That decision-making moment is where power lives. It's where people realize you're not passive, you're deliberate. The goal is not to become someone who reacts to everything. The goal is to become someone whose reactions are trusted because they're rare and accurate. When you do show firmness, people take it seriously because it's not constant, it's not noise. It's a signal that something specific has shifted, and that specificity is what makes it effective. This also applies to boundary setting outside of conflict. If you're always available, always accommodating, always flexible, people assume that's your permanent state. But if you occasionally say no without explanation, if you sometimes prioritize your own needs without guilt, you remind people that your availability is a choice, and choices can be withdrawn. That possibility alone increases respect because it reintroduces the concept that your time and energy are finite. The uncomfortable truth is this: respect is not a reward for being the calmest person in the room. It's a byproduct of being someone whose boundaries are clear, whose responses are calibrated, and whose calmness is understood as control rather than absence. If people can't tell the difference between your composure and your compliance, they'll treat you like the latter. And once that pattern is set, breaking it requires deliberate recalibration. You don't need to become loud. You don't need to become aggressive. You don't need to abandon your composure. You just need to add contrast. You need to make sure that your calmness is surrounded by enough moments of visible boundary enforcement that people never confuse it with indifference. Because indifference doesn't get respected, it gets overlooked. And you've been overlooked long enough. This is the recalibration. Stay calm, but stay visible. Stay composed, but stay firm. Let people see that your stillness is not submission, it's strategy. And strategy, when applied correctly, doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be felt.